Bruce Lee, the Dragon, defied physics, then at 32, defied explanation. His death left a void, a legend unfinished, and a mystery that still burns. On the humid evening of July 20, 1973, inside a quiet third-floor apartment at Beacon Hill Road in Kowloon, Hong Kong, the most physically dominant human being on the planet lay completely unresponsive on a mattress. Bruce Lee, the martial arts titan whose blinding speed and sculpted physique defied the limits of human biology, was slipping away into an irreversible coma at the age of 32. How could a man who could perform push-ups using only 2 fingers, punch with lightning velocity, and boast a body fat percentage close to 0 simply drop dead without a single mark of external violence? When emergency medical personnel finally arrived at Queen Elizabeth Hospital later that night, doctors desperately pumped his chest and injected stimulants directly into his heart, but it was already too late. The Dragon was gone. The initial chaos surrounding his death immediately sparked panic across Asia and the Western world, as rumors of foul play, covert poisonings, and secret societies began to swirl through the sweltering Hong Kong air. Arriving police officers found themselves facing an incredibly messy and heavily manipulated timeline of events, with key witnesses changing their initial stories to protect reputations and hide the true location of his final collapse. As the shocking news bulletin interrupted regular television broadcasts across the globe, a generation of fans was left in total disbelief, staring at images of a fallen icon whose demise made absolutely no logical sense. The rush by local colonial authorities to issue a simple medical explanation did nothing to quiet the growing, dark suspicion that the ultimate fighter had been taken down by a hidden hand, beginning an enduring mystery that remains unsolved to this day. To fully comprehend the seismic shockwave that gripped the global public when the news of Bruce Lee's death broke, one must understand that he was standing precisely on the precipice of the most explosive cultural breakthrough in entertainment history. Lee was not just a successful martial artist, he was a revolutionary cultural force who had single-handedly broken down Hollywood's racial barriers, reinventing the action hero for a global audience that had never seen an Asian leading man with such mesmerizing, magnetic screen power. He possessed an almost supernatural charisma, combining lethal, authentic combat proficiency with the dramatic intensity of a classical stage performer and the grace of a professional dancer. Behind the scenes, he operated with a frantic, obsessive work ethic, pushing his body through grueling, 12-hour training regimens, consuming raw beef and vegetable juices, and constantly experimenting with electrical muscle stimulation to maximize his performance. He was a brilliant philosopher who preached adaptability and personal freedom, inspiring millions of practitioners across the United States, the United Kingdom, and Canada to abandon rigid traditions in favor of his fluid combat style, Jeet Kune Do. Yet, this public image of absolute, unbreakable health masked an exhausting, hyper-accelerated lifestyle that was pushing his nervous system to the absolute breaking point. He was sleeping fewer than 5 hours a night, carrying the immense financial weight of a major film studio on his back, and fighting a relentless, daily battle against industry executives who still doubted his global marketability, a profound pressure cooker that was quietly preparing to rupture just as his lifelong dream was within his grasp. Long before he became an international symbol of physical power, Bruce Lee was deeply immersed in the chaotic worlds of both street combat and professional entertainment. Born in San Francisco but raised in the crowded, post-war streets of Hong Kong, he was a prolific child actor who appeared in over 20 Cantonese films, developing an innate, flawless mastery of the camera before he was even a teenager. However, his rebellious nature frequently landed him in violent street fights with local gang members, prompting his worried parents to enroll him in formal Wing Chun training under the legendary Grandmaster IP Man. This discipline transformed his aggression into a precise science, but his continued street brawls eventually forced his family to send him back to America in 1959 with only $100 in his pocket. In Seattle and later California, Lee fought a brutal, uphill battle against systemic prejudice, teaching martial arts to students of all races, opening independent academies, and eventually landing the role of Kato in the short-lived television series, The Green Hornet. While Hollywood executives repeatedly marginalized him, refusing to cast him as the lead in Western projects due to his accent. Lee refused to accept defeat. He returned to Hong Kong in 1971 to star in The Big Boss and Fist of Fury. These low-budget projects shattered all existing box office records across Asia, transforming him into an overnight phenomenon and forcing Warner Brothers to finally return to him with a massive, historic co-production offer that would change the cinematic landscape forever. By the summer of 1973, Bruce Lee had finally achieved the absolute creative autonomy he had been desperately fighting for his entire professional life. He had just completed principal photography on Enter the Dragon, the massive, high-stakes collaboration between his independent company, Concord Production, and Warner Brothers Pictures. Lee had poured his entire soul into the project, acting as the lead star, the fight choreographer, the uncredited director of the action sequences, and the philosophical anchor of the entire narrative. He knew with absolute certainty that this film would be the definitive turning point that would finally launch him into the stratosphere of global superstardom, proving to the Western entertainment establishment that an Asian actor could carry a multi-million-dollar international blockbuster. The rough cuts of the film were generating immense, unprecedented buzz among Hollywood executives in Los Angeles, who were already preparing a massive, nationwide promotional campaign for its August release. Lee was working at a frantic, manic pace, editing footage, recording looping tracks in stifling, non-air-conditioned dubbing suites, and mapping out his next cinematic project, Game of Death. He was a man running on pure adrenaline, his weight dropping drastically due to the extreme heat and stress, yet his public statements remained filled with triumphant, boundless confidence. He was mere weeks away from seeing his face plastered across thousands of billboards from New York to London, entirely unaware that the biological clock inside his own head was rapidly ticking down its final, agonizing hours. The terrifying truth that mainstream histories often overlook is that Bruce Lee's fatal collapse in July was not a sudden, unpredictable lightning strike. His body had already issued a definitive, near-fatal warning sign exactly 2 months prior. On May 10, 1973, while working inside a suffocatingly hot, unventilated dubbing room at the Golden Harvest Studios in Hong Kong, Lee suddenly collapsed into violent convulsions, vomiting and gasping for air as his body went rigid. He was rushed to the Baptist Hospital, where doctors discovered his brain was swelling severely with excess fluid, a critical, life-threatening condition known medically as cerebral edema. The attending neurosurgeon, Dr. Peter Wu, acted with immense speed, administering manna sugar to reduce the internal cranial pressure and successfully pulling the actor back from the very brink of death. Lee spent several days recovering in the hospital, undergoing a battery of sophisticated neurological tests before flying to Los Angeles for a complete medical evaluation by top American physicians. Remarkably, the American doctors declared him to be in the physical condition of a 20-year-old athlete, finding no structural abnormalities in his brain and attributing the episode to a transient metabolic imbalance or overwork. Reassured by this clean bill of health, Lee returned to his grueling schedule in Hong Kong, dismissing the incident as a minor hurdle, while Dr. Wu remained privately deeply concerned that the underlying cause of the brain swelling had never been truly identified, leaving a ticking time bomb ticking quietly inside the star's skull. The timeline of Friday, July 20, 1973, began with an atmosphere of routine business that quickly devolved into a domestic nightmare. Bruce Lee spent the early afternoon at his home, discussing the script for Game of Death with his business partner and studio head, Raymond Chow, before driving over to the apartment of Betty Ting Pei, a glamorous young Taiwanese actress with whom Lee was secretly romantically involved. Around 4 p.m., Chow left the apartment to attend a dinner meeting, leaving Lee and Betty alone to review production notes and relax before joining Chow later that evening. As the afternoon progressed, Lee began complaining of an increasingly severe, blinding headache that made him visibly restless and uncomfortable in the heavy summer heat. Sensing his distress, Betty offered him a single tablet of Equagesic, a common, prescription-strength painkiller containing a mixture of aspirin and a mild tranquilizer called meprobamate, which she routinely used herself for tension headaches. Lee swallowed the pill with a glass of water around 7:30 p.m. and stated that he needed to lie down on her bed to rest his eyes and let the pain subside. He walked into the quiet bedroom, pulled the blankets up, and drifted off into what Betty assumed was a deep, restorative sleep, entirely unaware that the chemical compounds he had just ingested were interacting with his compromised biology to trigger a catastrophic, irreversible swelling of his cerebral tissue. What occurred inside the Beacon Hill Road apartment between 8 p.m. and 10 p.m. remains one of the most heavily scrutinized windows of time in modern history. Around 9 p.m., Raymond Chow called Betty's apartment to ask why she and Lee had not yet arrived at the restaurant, prompting Betty to walk into the bedroom to wake the sleeping star. She shook his shoulder, but Lee did not move. She called his name louder, but his body remained heavy, cold, and completely limp on the mattress. Terrified, Betty immediately called Chow, who rushed back to the apartment and spent several frantic minutes attempting to revive Lee by slapping his face, massaging his chest, and calling his name in a state of absolute panic. Recognizing the immense, explosive scandal that would erupt if the world discovered Hong Kong's biggest married icon had died in the bed of a young actress, a disastrous decision was allegedly made to delay calling an ambulance while they attempted to fix the situation. They called Betty's private physician, Dr. Eugene Chu, who arrived at the apartment and spent 10 critical minutes attempting to find a pulse before realizing the situation was entirely catastrophic. When an ambulance was finally summoned at 10:30 p.m., the paramedics were explicitly instructed to bypass the closest medical facility and drive Lee all the way to Queen Elizabeth Hospital, a lengthy, agonizing transit during which the world's greatest martial artist was technically already a corpse. The sudden, devastating announcement of Bruce Lee's death sent shockwaves through the global media, forcing British colonial authorities to launch a formal, high-stakes coroner's inquest to determine the definitive cause of the tragedy. For several tense weeks, the court listened to testimonies from medical experts, pathologists, and the individuals who were inside the apartment during his final hours. The autopsy report revealed one single, staggering physical fact: Bruce Lee's brain had swollen from a normal weight of 1,400 grams to an astonishing, congested 1,575 grams, a massive accumulation of fluid that had compressed his vital brainstem and caused his respiratory system to completely shut down. Outside of this massive cerebral edema, the pathologist found absolutely no signs of internal bleeding, physical trauma, mechanical strangulation, or illicit narcotics in his system. After weighing all the conflicting medical testimonies, the coroner officially ruled the cause of death as a hypersensitivity reaction to one of the chemical components in the equagesic painkiller he had taken for his headache. The court officially recorded the final verdict as death by misadventure, a legal term indicating an accidental death resulting from an unforeseen risk taken during a lawful act. To the British administration, the case was technically closed, a neat biological accident, but to the millions of grieving fans outside the courthouse, this sterile chemical explanation was an insulting, completely unbelievable answer to the fall of an immortal hero. The primary reason the official, death by misadventure, ruling failed to satisfy the public was that it flatly contradicted everything the world knew about the fundamental laws of physical health. Bruce Lee was universally regarded as the absolute gold standard of human fitness, a man who treated his body like a flawless, highly calibrated machine and possessed a legendary, fanatical resistance to physical weakness. The idea that a single, over-the-counter painkiller tablet could instantly destroy the most powerful athlete on earth seemed not only biologically impossible but completely absurd to his peers in the martial arts community. Elite fighters pointed out that Lee had taken similar medications multiple times throughout his career to manage training injuries without ever exhibiting a single adverse symptom. Furthermore, prominent medical professionals independent of the Hong Kong government openly questioned how a simple hypersensitivity reaction could cause such localized, extreme cerebral edema without triggering other classic systemic signs of anaphylactic shock, such as hives, throat swelling, or fluid accumulation in the lungs. The glaring inconsistencies in the timeline provided by Raymond Chow and Betty Ting Pei, who initially told reporters that Lee had collapsed at his own home with his wife Linda beside him, shattered the credibility of the official narrative. This massive wall of secrecy and shifting stories convinced the public that the British authorities were actively participating in a high-profile corporate cover-up, hiding a far more sinister and explosive truth to protect the financial interests of the film industry. As independent researchers dug deeper into the medical records of the case, the specific pharmacology of the painkiller allergy theory began to face intense, scientific skepticism. Equagesic was a highly common, mass-marketed drug in 1973, consumed by millions of people daily for routine muscle pain and tension headaches without any reported instances of sudden, fatal cerebral edema. The drug's two active ingredients, aspirin and meprobamate, are well-documented compounds, and while allergic reactions to aspirin can occur, they almost universally manifest as severe skin rashes, respiratory asthma attacks, or gastrointestinal distress, not as an isolated, massive swelling of the brain tissue. Pathologists noted that for a first-time chemical allergy to cause instantaneous, fatal cerebral edema within 2 hours of ingestion is an extraordinarily rare, nearly unprecedented anomaly in medical literature. Furthermore, toxicological screens performed on Lee's blood and stomach contents during the autopsy revealed only minute, trace amounts of the drug, confirming that he had not taken an overdose or accidental combination of toxic substances. This chemical paradox led many forensic experts to suggest that the equagesic pill was a complete red herring, a minor detail that happened to occur at the end of his life but had absolutely nothing to do with the underlying biological crisis that actually killed him, leaving the true catalyst for his brain swelling completely unaccounted for in the official records. In recent decades, a powerful and highly persuasive scientific theory has emerged from modern sports medicine researchers that reframes Bruce Lee's death not as a murder or a drug allergy, but as a tragic case of severe heatstroke compounded by a dangerous surgical modification. In the months leading up to his death, Lee had undergone an elective surgical procedure in Los Angeles to completely remove the sweat glands from his armpits, believing that visible sweat patches on his clothes looked unappealing and unprofessional on the movie screen. However, the human body relies heavily on its sweat glands to regulate its internal core temperature, especially when performing intense physical activity in high-humidity environments. On July 20, 1973, Hong Kong was experiencing a brutal, oppressive heatwave, and Lee had spent the day working in stifling, non-air-conditioned rooms while already suffering from extreme physical exhaustion and fluid deprivation. Without the ability to sweat efficiently from his upper body, Lee's internal temperature may have skyrocketed into a state of hyperthermia, causing his metabolic systems to collapse and triggering a massive, acute cerebral edema identical to the episode he suffered in May. This theory elegantly explains both his severe headache, a classic symptom of heat injury, and the massive brain swelling found during the autopsy, presenting a tragic reality where the dragon was ultimately undone by a cosmetic surgical choice and the unforgiving climate of his own hometown. While modern scientists debate thermal regulation, the streets of Hong Kong immediately embraced a far more cinematic and terrifying explanation, a calculated execution orchestrated by the city's notorious organized crime syndicates, the Triads. The Triads held an immense, iron-fisted grip on the local Cantonese film industry during the 1970s, routinely extorting money from production companies, controlling distribution rights, and forcing popular actors into exploitative, low-paying contracts. Bruce Lee, a fiercely independent and proud individual, had repeatedly and publicly refused to bow to Triad intimidation, openly mocking their representatives and refusing to pay protection money to local gang bosses. Rumors spread like wildfire that a Triad assassin had slipped into the apartment or poisoned his herbal teas with a rare, undetectable organic toxin that would mimic the symptoms of a natural brain swelling. Other, more mystical whispers circulated within the traditional martial arts community, suggesting that Lee had been targeted by a rival master using the fabled Dim Mak, the legendary Death Touch, a precise, delayed action strike to specific meridian points on the body that causes internal organs to fail weeks after the initial impact. While these theories lack any verifiable forensic evidence, they reflect the profound, volatile environment of 1973 Hong Kong, a world where a clean-cut hero's defiance of the criminal underworld made him a highly logical target for a permanent, silent retribution. The dark mystique surrounding the premature death of Bruce Lee took an even more chilling and tragic turn exactly 20 years later, transforming a singular medical mystery into what the world now recognizes as the terrifying Lee family curse. In March of 1993, Bruce's only son, Brandon Lee, a brilliantly talented, 28-year-old actor on the cusp of his own Hollywood breakthrough, was tragically shot and killed on the North Carolina set of the dark action film, The Crow. In an unbelievable, freak sequence of mechanical failures, a real bullet tip had become lodged inside the barrel of a prop revolver and was propelled forward by a blank cartridge during a routine filming sequence, striking Brandon in the abdomen with fatal force. The sheer, uncanny parallels between the deaths of father and son horrified the global public. Both men died at the exact threshold of international superstardom, both died under highly unusual, disputed circumstances involving a film production, and both left behind a legacy cut short at the absolute peak of their physical youth. Conspiracy theorists immediately pointed out that in Bruce Lee's final unfinished film, Game of Death, his character is actually shot by a real bullet disguised as a prop on a movie set, an eerie, prophetic mirror of his son's real-world demise 2 decades later, sealing the belief that an inescapable generational shadow haunted the family line. The profound global grief sparked by Bruce Lee's passing manifested in 2 completely distinct, chaotic funeral ceremonies separated by thousands of miles of ocean. The first service, held in Hong Kong on July 25, was a massive, near-riotous public event that brought the entire British colony to a complete standstill. Over 30,000 hysterical fans lined the sweltering streets, weeping openly and breaking through police barricades just to catch a brief glimpse of the bronze casket carrying their fallen hero, while several young women reportedly fainted from the extreme heat and emotional exhaustion. Following this massive Asian farewell, Lee's grieving widow, Linda, flew his body back to the United States for a second, deeply private ceremony held in Seattle, Washington, on July 30th. This American service was a somber, intimate gathering attended by his closest friends, family members, and Hollywood students, including film icons like James Coburn, Steve McQueen, and Chuck Norris, who stood as pallbearers to lower the master into the soil of Lakeview Cemetery. The stark contrast between the explosive, public madness of Hong Kong and the quiet, rain-slicked dignity of Seattle perfectly mirrored the dual identity of a man who spent his life bridging the massive cultural divide between East and West, leaving his physical remains permanently anchored in the American Pacific Northwest while his spirit belonged to the streets of Asia. Mere weeks after his body was laid to rest in the Seattle soil, Warner Brothers released Enter the Dragon into theaters across North America and Europe, instantly igniting a global cultural phenomenon that would permanently immortalize the fallen star. The film was an absolute box office juggernaut, grossing hundreds of millions of dollars worldwide and completely revolutionizing the style, tone, and choreography of Western action cinema for generations to come. Audiences flocked to theaters in unprecedented numbers, captivated by the sight of a man who possessed a physical speed so intense that film editors literally had to slow down the camera frames just to make his movements visible to the human eye. Lee became an overnight, posthumous icon, his image appearing on millions of t-shirts, posters, and magazine covers, sparking a massive, global martial arts boom that saw millions of children enrolling in karate and kung fu schools across the West. The tragic irony of his success was absolute. The global superstardom he had spent his entire life working, fighting, and sacrificing his health to achieve had finally arrived, but he was no longer here to witness a single moment of his own historic triumph, remaining forever frozen in time as a vibrant, invincible 32-year-old warrior. In the decades since the original 1973 inquest, advancements in forensic medicine and pathology have allowed modern physicians to re-examine the historical data, leading to a new medical consensus that challenges the original allergy verdict while maintaining a completely natural explanation. In 2022, a prominent team of kidney specialists and forensic pathologists published a comprehensive study reviewing Lee's autopsy files, proposing that his fatal cerebral edema was actually caused by hyponatremia, a critical medical condition where the sodium concentration in the blood drops dangerously low due to an excess of water retention. The researchers pointed out that Lee possessed multiple severe risk factors for this condition, including an exceptionally high fluid intake consisting of juices and water, a history of chronic alcohol use, and the heavy use of prescription medications that severely impaired his kidneys' ability to excrete excess water from his system. On that final humid afternoon, his kidneys simply failed to process the fluid load, causing his brain cells to rapidly absorb the excess water and swell to a fatal degree, independent of any drug allergy or criminal poisoning. While this modern scientific verdict provides a logical, non-sinister explanation for his collapse, it does little to quiet the romantic skeptics who still prefer the dark allure of a Hollywood conspiracy over the clinical reality of a metabolic failure. Despite the best efforts of modern forensic science to reduce the tragedy to a simple equation of fluid retention and heat exhaustion, the fundamental mysteries surrounding Bruce Lee's final hours continue to echo through history. The primary witnesses who held the absolute truth of that evening have largely vanished or clutched their secrets tightly. Raymond Chow passed away in 2018, having spent decades modifying his public statements regarding the exact timeline of the ambulance call, while Betty Ting Pei withdrew into a life of Buddhist isolation, her memoirs offering a shifting mix of emotional defense and contradictory details. The original medical files, tissue samples, and toxicological slides from the 1973 autopsy have long been discarded or lost in the bureaucratic vaults of Hong Kong's health department, making any modern retesting completely impossible. This permanent lack of physical evidence ensures that the space once occupied by factual certainty will forever be filled by the persistent whispers of the streets. Was he a casualty of his own obsessive physical perfection, a victim of a corrupt colonial cover-up, or a threat that the criminal underworld simply could not allow to live? The answers remain locked in the silent walls of that Kowloon apartment, leaving the world to wonder what truly happened when the lights finally went out on the world's greatest fighter. Ultimately, the true significance of Bruce Lee does not reside in the sterile clinical details of his death certificate, but in the immortal, unyielding legacy of the life he lived across his brief 32 years. He stands as an eternal, global symbol of human potential, a man who took the raw elements of physical movement and transformed them into a sophisticated art form that continues to inspire millions of practitioners across every continent. The mystery of his sudden departure on July 20, 1973, remains a haunting, open wound in the history of cinema, a reminder of the fragile line that separates absolute physical genius from the cold reality of biological mortality. Yet, by leaving the stage at the absolute peak of his youth, speed, and power, he achieved a unique form of cultural immortality. He never grew old, he never faded into professional irrelevance, and his cinematic presence remains as electric and vital today as it was 5 decades ago. Bruce Lee taught the world that the key to immortality is first living a life worth remembering, and though his physical journey ended in silence on a Kowloon mattress, the voice of the dragon continues to echo through the ages, forever unbroken, forever undefeated, and forever unresolved. Before you go, here's the thing. Every week we investigate another mystery the world could never solve. Subscribe so you don't miss the next one. And here's the most important part. The next case we investigate could be yours. Tell us in the comments which unsolved mystery, disappearance, or disaster we should cover next. We read every suggestion, and the stories that stay with you are the ones we bring to life.